All right, so next up, we have a good friend of mine, Dave, coming on to share about his personal experiences and his own experiences raising a son who has suffered from addiction and struggled with substance use and misuse. All right, hey, Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to see you.
Always good to see you too.
Yeah, you look great. I love your haircut.
Thank you. I went cheap and had Brittany do it.
Brittany cut your hair. That's nice.
Yeah.
Good. Multi-talented.
Exactly.
She's multi-talented. So I was just telling our listeners that you are someone who's not only in recovery, but has raised a child who has navigated substance use and misuse. So I'm going to ask you to start by telling us a little bit about your own experience. How long are you in recovery, and basically how did you get here?
Oh, definitely. Well, I've been in recovery since May 6, 2009. First attempt at it, and I haven't felt the need to pick up since. It began when I was about 8 or 9. Was the first time I tried any mood or mind altering substance, and right from the beginning, I loved it. It quickly went over the top from use and recreational to need. And I spent most of my life till about the age of 41 struggling with addiction. Most people told me I had a problem, but I had managed to function for the most part. So I never saw it as a problem. You know, most of the time I had a roof over the head. Most of the time I had food in my stomach. Most of the time I was in a relationship, even though I was destroying it. So I didn't see that low bottom drunk or addict like you hear about, or try and use as an excuse to not address, or I tried to use as an excuse to not address my own problems. It came to a head when I finally just couldn't do it anymore. It just came to a head when I couldn't keep up the facade. I was down to 112 pounds. I was making my mother cry. I was making my wife at the time cry. My kids were definitely crying. Everybody was telling me I had a problem, and I still didn't really care until I just wasn't, the realization that I wasn't getting the same effect out of alcohol that I was when I was 15. So I went to a program, an outpatient program, an inpatient program, then an outpatient program, and I went into the rooms of recovery, and I did everything that was asked of me. And I found out that you can live life without the use and abuse of mind altering substances. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey since then.
And I have actually gotten to witness, the past 6 years of that. I should have probably prefaced with that Dave is the very first friend that I ever had. You're the very first friend I ever had in recovery who was also in recovery. Yeah, you were the first person to remember my name and actually pick up my calls, or you might have even been the one to call me first, which was so profound for me because at that point in my life, no one wanted to communicate with me at all. I had been excommunicated from everyone's lives. At that point, my mother had an order of protection against me, and I had lost every job and every friend I had ever had.
I remember.
Yeah, and you ran around with me for that first year, keeping me sober, just as I white knuckled it, trying to do the best I could to follow suggestions, but not really knowing, just still having that really sick brain from years of substance abuse.
We kept each other sober because it was a great time.
And we still do. And we still do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you was living in my old neighborhood in
Oh,
Brooklyn.
I was in Brooklyn at the time. Oh yeah, I used to call you to pluck me out of the craziest of situations.
Yeah.
We won't even go into that. But you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean. But all right. So yeah, I guess I want some of our listeners to hear about the progression of not only your addiction, but also about the progression of your recovery process. So let's start with, like kind of the negative and move into the positive. I want to hear some of the ways that you feel like you've failed in recovery.
In recovery? Well, I fail every day. I fail God every day. We use a slogan called progress, not perfection. I take it one day at a time and try to do the best I can. For me, well, I, I'll start with the biggest failure I had in recovery. I was 6 years sober. My wife at the time did not like sober Dave, did not want to do with somebody who was responsible. And, my own personal opinion was it made her look at herself, because I was a heroin addict when she met me. So somebody to go out with a heroin addict, I think might have had some issues, even though she's, good person at heart. I think she has her own issues. But the marriage was falling apart, and me and her were separating, but we're still living in the same house, and we had separate lives. But I didn't tell my kids that, and I lied to my kids. And subsequently, my actions caused my daughter and my son not to talk to me for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it really was an epiphany because my son called me he was in prison at the time. Actually, he was in jail at that time. And he called me to say that I wasn't a man. And for somebody to call from jail to tell me that I wasn't a man, somebody who used to look up to me, and then my daughter said that I wasn't the man she thought I was, made me truly realize what recovery really means. Because, there's a saying that they used to tell me in the group I got sober, and they used to say, a drunken horse thief that's not drinking is still a horse thief. And so for me, the negatives in recovery is when I realized that it wasn't alcohol necessarily that made me do some of the things I do. And that was a really big awakening. And that for me is one of the most negative things, because when my experience is when I get into recovery, or when I got into recovery and I work the steps, I develop a conscience, and I develop a purpose. It says, like, no matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. And that also means that I can show how my experience can benefit others by showing them what not to do. And I try not to do that today. One of the other negatives in recovery is that life doesn't stop because I stopped drinking and drugging. So there's financial debt, there's new relationships, there's kids, there's lots of other issues that has come up. And it's not like I could just run into a bottle and forget about it for a while. I got to deal with these things. And it was really tough because, I spent years in recovery almost homeless. I had a job, but the consequences of my actions left me with no money. It left me with pretty much alone, except for the fellowship in the rooms and people like you and stuff who I would still hang out with. But I could still feel alone even when I'm around a bunch of people, because I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And that takes work to get out of it, So for me, the only real negatives in recovery is when I'm not working the program. Other than that, recovery is an amazing thing. To have people like you were saying about, your mother pushing you away and stuff. My mother said to me the other day, we talk every Saturday for at least an hour and a half. And my other brothers and my sisters say, I don't understand what you guys talk about, what you guys are doing. And she said to me the other day, she said that each of her kids brings something different to her. And she feels so blessed that I bring her a spiritual aspect, because my mother's a very religious person and a very amazing person. You've met her. And she's just an amazing person. And for her to compliment me in that way is just amazing. So the benefits in recovery way outweigh the negatives. Now, if we're talking about the act of addiction, there is so many negatives that I keep trying to say other people that I didn't see while I was doing it. That same lady who said that I was such an inspiration to her, I remember I had OD'd in Washington Square Park, and my two brothers have dragged me home. And she had said I couldn't believe that was my son being dragged up the block. I remember living in a house in Castle Hill, and I needed alcohol, and it was early in the morning. So I was alone with my kids. They were 4 and 2 at the time. And I left them alone and said I was throwing out the garbage. And I ran 2 blocks down to the bodega to buy some beer. They were closed, so I ran another 3 blocks. The guy was just opening up. I finally got it. And when I came back, my son was holding my daughter's hand and they were scared. And I told them that I was throwing out the garbage. And they said, we looked outside and you weren't throwing out the garbage. And I said, I was on the side of the house. That's what I do. And those are the negatives that in sobriety mean a lot. At the time, it only meant something for about an hour or two because I still drank those beers. And then I said, you know what, they're okay. And I just kept on with my business. The negatives of the physical negatives of throwing up every day, throwing up blood and ending up in the hospital weighing 112 pounds. The negatives of never really getting the same high that I did when I first started, and it was fun. I'm one of those guys that won't tell you it's all negative. I'm not the guy. It was a lot of fun for a long time. In early addiction, I was a musician. I was playing out on Bleecker Street. I had the whole scene going, and free drugs, free booze, and everybody loves you and all that stuff. It was just amazing for a while. Excuse me, until it wasn't anymore. But just watching my life pass by, and you had adhered to it a little bit, just slowly watching people leave me, and being okay. I remember one time I was living in a gated community in Pomona. We had the whole thing, it was a 3-bedroom house and it had a swimming pool and apartment, and it had a swimming pool and clubhouse and all that stuff. And she was just done, and she said, you know what, go drink. I'm gonna take the kids out to the mall for a little bit. And I was so happy that I was just alone in my room with my booze. I see today how much that really is just a waste. Those are the negatives in recovery and in active addiction for me.
Yeah. So I heard like so many good things and things that I relate to. And like, so the first thing that I heard is that like, because my next question was going to be, how did those failures help you grow as a sober person? But I already feel like you answered that, because one of the things you said was that you fail every day. And I identify with that. And I feel that that's my truth as well, because I constantly fall short. I'm, aside from being someone in recovery, from a very sick state, I am also just a human. And the thing that I learned in recovery and that I took away from what you just said is that that's okay. Because with all my perfections, I am exactly how the universe, how my higher power, how a God, how whatever you perceive to be the order of things has made me. That's exactly what I'm supposed to be. I am perfect with all of those imperfections. So being
Absolutely.
imperfect is okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the other thing that I heard, because we have a lot of listeners who are young, and I got sober at 22. I'm still in my 20s, and I was listening to you, and I was just thinking, you telling your children that you were going to take out the garbage and disappearing for however long you were gone, with them being scared and not knowing when their father was going to come back, if he was going to come back, and how he was going to come back, in what state he would come back, right? Reminded me of not only my childhood, because I have a father who's an alcoholic and an addict who's now in recovery, but wasn't at the time. And then my mind brought me to the place where I realized that could have justice if I didn't find the program of recovery, and if I didn't work the prevention methods that I now work, that could have just as easily been me. And I could someday be making those decisions. And I still could someday be making those decisions that directly impact my children and the people around me if I don't continue to practice the principles of prevention and recovery in my life. Prevention is all about not picking up that first drink or drug. but there's a whole lot that comes along with that statement. You don't simply just not pick up the drug. You have to pick up other tools. So that's something that I took away from what you shared. So I'd like to thank you. And now I guess what I would ask next is what advice would you give the person you were in the beginning of your sober journey? What advice would you, as yourself today, give day one Dave?
Day one in addiction?
Day one in sobriety, Dave. What would, you're coming up on what, 10 years now?
12.
Oh my God. We've
Yeah,
known each other that long. That's weird.
absolutely.
That's so weird. Okay, so what would year 12 Dave, year 11 coming up on 12 Dave, tell day one Dave?
Keep the faith, it gets better.
Keep the faith, it gets better. Awesome. Very concise, very to the point, exactly what a lot of people need to hear day one. And the funny part about that is I heard that for sure, because I knew you day one. Sometimes I needed to, but for whatever reason, like my thick brain needed to hear that so many times to really grasp what that means. It gets better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So now let's talk a little bit about your son, David Jr. And my first question regarding David Jr. would be, what are some of the signs that told you he was abusing drugs or an alcohol, or even the warning signs that he may be kind of prey for substance abuse in the future? Because I, knowing myself, I know there were red flags leading up to my addiction, like things like stealing, or things of that illicit activity that I shouldn't have been involved in, but always was kind of drawn to.
Absolutely could not tell you.
That's okay.
And the reason why I say that is because me being an addict alcoholic, I had a clouded mind and I thought that I knew. And the reason why I say that is because my son's first rehab, they did this thing on Family Day. Well, actually before that, my son's first rehab, when we did the intake, they asked when he picked up, and I said about 6 months ago, and he said, no, that's not true. I've been using for 2 years.
Wow.
So I obviously did not see the signs, even though they were there in front of my face. He was using in my face. I was the coach of his basketball team. I was president of the PTA in his school. I wasn't one of those fathers who wasn't around, whether I was active or not active. And he was using for 2 years, and I did not know. And then there was Family Day in the rehab. And when they did a thing called the family dynamic, where there was a board and each member of the family would put a peg in a circle as to what each person was. And I had put David in the middle and said he was the one looking for the attention, and my daughter was the one looking for attention, and my wife at the time was the enabler, and I was the one trying to control. And then when they asked David to do it, he put himself outside the circle. So I didn't even know how he was feeling. Now, that being said, there was warning signs because he had a lot of behaviors like mine. He was always with a lot of friends, but still would seem to be introverted. He was doing very good. Like I remember in kindergarten, they said he would do bad things, but he would always be honest that he did it. And that was one of the things I did. I was very honest, at least in the beginning. I was very honest about stuff that I did, and they were always like, yeah, he's just so honest that he did it, but then he said he was sorry, and he admitted to it, and that's such a good quality. But meanwhile, it's part of the manipulating feature of the addict or the alcoholic. So for me, in my experience, and I also find that in a lot of experiences, because I have been in programs for people who are the loved ones of people who are in addiction, and we learn that we don't always see it. And that's okay. That's okay, because when I did see it, I was able to change my behaviors. Because once again, actually, it goes back to the previous question about negatives in sobriety. Some of the things I said to him was totally inappropriate. Like, he's a loser. his life is going to mean nothing if he continues the way he's going. And that's not true. And that's the last thing that somebody needs to hear. And shame on me being an addict alcoholic that I would still do that to them. Because for some reason, I understood for me and wanted the love and tolerance, but when it came to my son, I didn't have that same love and tolerance.
Mm. Right. So, okay, I heard a lot of really good stuff there. So I imagine, that there are a lot of parents who are thinking to themselves, like, how could I not see this? How could I not know this? The point is that sometimes you simply cannot, or you don't, for no other reason than you love that person so dearly. And it doesn't mean you're a bad parent, because what I heard is that you showed up for everything, but David was really good at manipulating you. And I also, and that's, that's a part of addiction and substance use. And I imagine, like, there are some parents who are feeling badly about themselves, but here in front of me is someone sitting in front of me is someone who I know to be an upstanding person with very profoundly strong morals and values, who would do anything and has done everything in his power for his family. To sit here and say to me, I had no idea, like, wow, that just really goes to show me that anyone can miss this. Anyone can miss this. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent or a bad person or negligent.
Well, not only that, I learned in therapy that not only did I miss it to some extent, but I mentally wasn't ready to see it, so I was able to block it out.
Right.
And that's something that I learned.
So what I just heard is, like, you actually acknowledging some of these things came with a significant amount of help from a support network of professionals and friends and people who experienced the same things, and people who knew nothing about raising a child in the same situation, and people who had raised several children who had been in that situation, but you did not do it alone.
Absolutely. There's tons of support groups out there. And actually, we keep going back to the negatives. One of the negatives I have is I don't do social media. There is tons of support groups on social media, like Facebook for parents of addicts and stuff like that. But I went to groups like PHP, with Parents Helping Parents. RCAD was a great one. They have a lot of great programs. Then there's the 12-step programs that you can go to. But there's tons of support groups out there. DBSA, which deals with the mental illness side of that. Most addicts and alcoholics have a little bit of mental illness, whether it's bipolar or depression or whatever. And so, yeah, there is a ton of support. And I once I succumbed to the fact that my son was an addict, and I was willing to accept that, I opened myself up to a lot of help.
Right. And I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a part of what WEPA does. And that's a part of why this podcast is a podcast. Why we're able to do it is because WEPA has so successfully provided so many communities in the Bronx, and now outside of the Bronx, with support and with resources to help them prevent, or, in the hopes of preventing what you've been through, what your son has been through, what the two of you have been through together. So I think that's a really, amazing thing to touch on, is that there is support out there, and we are a support network. And that's exactly what WEPA is. That is our primary purpose, is to spread a message of prevention and to bring people together with a singleness of purpose. So, I guess one of my questions was going to be, like, some of the things you didn't do the best, or feel that you didn't do the best. But I feel like you kind of touched upon, like, you feel like you've made a few mistakes, or maybe things that you would have done differently if you knew then what you know now. So I guess what I want to ask you is, like, what would you say to the parent who's listening to this, who just doesn't feel like they're getting it right with their child? They just keep thinking, like, man, I am not getting this right. Like, I'm either messing up or I'm confused and I don't know what to do. Like, what would you tell that parent?
What I would tell that parent is There is no right or wrong. It's all a part of the journey. What I would tell that parent is that as long as that child is alive, there's hope. There was times when I wouldn't see my son for long periods at a time. I didn't know if he was alive or dead. There was times he did 5 years in prison. He did several stints in jail. There was time that actual gangbangers had surrounded him, trying to kill him. And I've had those experiences too, not so much the prison, but people trying to kill you and all that stuff. And there is something watching over them. And then they have, it sounds kind of weird, but most addicts and alcoholics are very crafty. And they have a way that they survive. And you don't realize exactly how. I was blessed enough to have a relationship with my son today. And I was blessed enough to have conversations with him where he feels open enough to tell me situations he's been in, and you stand there and go, oh, really? And they survive these things. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. But again, as long as they are alive, there is hope. And the other thing I would suggest is, if it is a two-parent family, you have to be on the same page. And some people might take this the wrong way, but for me, and this is my opinion, I looked at it as it was us against him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not his friend, I'm his father. And I had a guide taking me through that fellowship, and he always said to me, if everybody's happy with your decisions, you're doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the addict is happy with your decisions, or the person that you feel is not on the same page with you, in my case, it was my ex-wife who was enabling him, then I'm doing something wrong. There's supposed to be periods of uncomfortability. There's supposed to be arguments and fighting, but that's what comes with addiction. They say addiction touches no less than 7 different people. That's 7 different opinions, 7 different mindsets, 7 different emotions going on. There's gonna be conflict, and that's okay. What I learned was that, what am I doing? Because the only thing I really can control is myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very important for me to stay calm. It was very important for me to not use derogatory words like you're a loser or whatnot. I could say stuff like, your behavior is unacceptable and it's not allowed in my house. And if it continues, I am going to go through a process to get you to leave, which I did with my son. And I actually had a restraining order against him, and he did have to leave that house. I had to. I was told once by a good friend of mine in my support group, she said that I had to learn to mourn the child I gave birth to and love the child I had.
Mm.
For a long time, I actually hated my son. Today, I don't hate my son. He is sick, he has a disease, and he does some behaviors that is just horrible. Or he used to. He's so much better today.
Mm.
And I have to understand that he has a disease. He's not a bad person, he's a sick person. And those are things that really help me to develop today, do we have the relationship I want? Absolutely not. But we have a good, I was with him the other day. I went over to the house. Whether or not he was high, I don't know, but he's now a good father to his child. He's a good boyfriend to the mother of his child. He tries to do the right thing. We hang out and talk every now and then, and we feel open with each other, and we are building a relationship. He wrote me a letter once and said, I'm really happy that we're working on building a relationship. Now, old Dave, selfish Dave would be like, are you kidding me? I need to build a relationship with my son. You're my son. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Relationship with this kid.
You muted yourself by accident.
There's a phone call coming in. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're okay. You're good.
Today, I'm very happy that I am able to build a relationship with this kid, and I feel as strong than it ever was.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is really a cool conversation because like, there are this is so multifaceted. This conversation, you are not only a parent of someone in recovery. You are in recovery yourself. I am a person in recovery. I'm also still young, relatively young. I don't have children. I just kind of got out of that David Jr. situation. So like, this is very interesting for me to hear because it sheds light on what my parents or what my mom really had gone through at the time when I was still in active addiction and when I was misusing substances. So that's really profound for me to be able to hear as someone who's on the younger side of things. And I think that these are also important messages for not only parents, but the children who are unaware of their parents' suffering. So before I let you go, and I will let you go,
No
I
way.
I appreciate the time we've got to spend together because I know your life is super hectic and crazy busy, and you do a million jobs and have a million commitments and service commitments and people you help. But I wanted to leave on a very positive note, and I wanted you to tell us. I'm sure everyone wants to hear, what are some of your greatest successes and your proudest moments with David Jr.?
With David Jr., uh, some of my proudest moments is him. I took him to his surgery. He actually, when he was in prison, he broke his back and he was misdiagnosed. And he called me up and said he wanted me to be there with him to take him to surgery. It was actually a very dangerous surgery. He split a disc in his back, was pinching against his spine and pinching against a nerve. He was almost paralyzed. And he wanted me there. That was one of my proudest moments. When he came out of prison, I have two new kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, one biologically mine, the other not, but he's still my kid. And I hung out with him and his girl and his kid, which was one of the proudest moments for us to be together as, I mean, it was me, my son, and my grandson together. And he came over to the house and we hung out, which was really nice. Also, it sounds crazy, but working out together. I'm starting a business, doing it with the gym and everything, and he's a big gym guy. And it's just when we talk together about that laughing together. There wasn't a lot of laughing when I was an addict and addiction. There wasn't a lot of laughing when he was in addiction. It was funny. There was an overlap there sometimes, which I did not know. And to sit there with him and actually joke and talk and be open together is one of my proudest moments. To help him go back and find work, to be able to just make a suggestion and be okay with it. And it may sound funny, but one of my proudest moments was the time that I went to pick him up and he was actually high as a kite. And I said, once, are you high? And he said, no. And I knew he was. And I was able to let it go. And we hung out. I did have to cut it short, but we did hang out and we was able to talk. And I realized that I can truly look at him as a person that has an addiction, that is sick and not a bad person. And, because he's had periods of sobriety. So to watch him had unfortunately lose that sobriety, which today I believe he has it. That's not my journey, but to sit there and be not condone it, but to understand it and be able to love him anyway. And I know that he knew. And I think that was probably one of the greatest moments because I think it strengthened our relationship.
So,
Because,
wow, I just heard some amazing things.
yeah.
I mean, what I heard is that your relationship with David has shifted, not because of who he has become or how he's changed, but entirely because of the shift in your perspective and in your actions. And that is like amazing. And as your friend, I am incredibly proud of you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. But yes, it isn't how I look at him. I can't rely on his sobriety to be the catalyst for our relationship. I have to be able to love him no matter what. He didn't, a friend of mine taught me when my kid was she used to say with her kids, say, my kid wasn't in kindergarten, and when they ask you what you want to be when you grow up, you say, I want to be a homeless addict. They don't raise their hand to say that. It happens. And when I can come to terms with that, the world changes and it becomes a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Well, that is a perfect note to end on. And again, I want to thank you a million times over for your time. This was my first conversation with someone on this podcast. You know, I don't know how it'll come up in editing, but this was the first, and it definitely surpassed any of my expectations. Although I definitely had high expectations knowing who you are as a person. So thank you.
No,
And I
thank
love
you
you.
for all your service. What?
And I love you. You missed it. I told you I love you. Say it back.
I love you too.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to give you a call soon. Thanks for coming.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Love you.
And keep up the good work.
I will.
Okay?
All right.
All right. Love you too.